Denver Broncos head coach Sean Payton enamored with J.J. McCarthy. Loose lips sink ships. That doesn't sound like Sean Payton. We'll tell you a little bit more about that on today's brand new episode, Locked On Broncos.
You are Locked On Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What's up, Broncos Country? Welcome into a brand new episode of Locked On Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Special shout out. Thank you so much to everybody in Broncos Country and all the everydayers out there who make us your first listen of the day every single day. Just a reminder, you can get Locked On Broncos for free every single day, all year long on YouTube or wherever you get your podcast. So do us a favor, hit that subscribe or that follow button down below so you never miss out on what's going on with your favorite team every single day. Today's episode is in-depth. We got a lot to break down here. I'm Cody Roark, Broncos reporter from Mile High Sports, joined alongside, as always, by Sayre Bedinger, site expert, predominantlyorange.com. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers, they get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 if your bet wins. Visit FanDuel.com/locked on to get started. Sayre, there's a lot of talk about who the Broncos like. Obviously, the NFL Combine. We got to learn a lot about maybe who the Broncos met with. But just once again, this is the time of the year where you see a lot of engagement farming on social media apps to really generate discussion, to generate views and engagement on top of that so that they can get paid on their social media rollout plans here. But the reality of the situation is, if there's anything coming out about who the Denver Broncos like, I guarantee you it's not coming from the organization.
And it's funny that you say this, Cody, because I wrote an article on Predominantly Orange the other day talking about, like, don't believe the bogus rumors that you hear this time of year. And we've heard things like, Sean Payton is enamored with J.J. McCarthy, right? And that even came from, I believe, the voice of the Minnesota Vikings, Paul Allen, which is an interesting, like, how did Paul Allen get the inside info from who Sean Payton is enamored with before Sean Payton even met with J.J. McCarthy? I mean, it's very interesting. And look, it may end up being, the Broncos may end up being enamored with J.J. McCarthy. They may end up really liking J.J. McCarthy. Maybe they already do now that they've met with him at the scouting combine officially. But look, whatever you hear this time of year, take it with a gigantic grain of salt, because everything that you hear this year is going to be said very deliberately. As you said earlier, Cody, loose lips, they sink ships. And so if the Broncos love somebody in this draft, you got to think about, this is a head coach in Sean Payton who kept his coaching staff hires secret from everybody else for weeks, to the point that media members were getting angry with him about it, saying, I can't believe this guy hasn't hired a staff. You think that his franchise quarterback that he wants to pick, the guy that he likes the most in this draft, you think that that information is going to be getting out there to the voice of the Minnesota Vikings? With all due respect to Paul Allen, who is incredible at calling games. I've heard many of his calls, Cody. He's fantastic. With all due respect to him, I think you can't believe everything you hear this time of year.
And this isn't Latte Gate 2.0. We already got Latte Gate the first time with his comments on Nathaniel Hackett. Sean is not a guy, and I want to make this very clear. Someone who's been around Sean, who works, in the same, like when it's in season, I see Sean Payton almost every day that there's practice, right? And the thing about Sean, he doesn't tell us anything. He doesn't tell anybody anything. He might tell his close friends and family, but everything that goes on inside the Broncos front office, the conversations between he and George Payton and their scouts, that information never gets leaked, which I think is actually a really good thing, right? And I'd say since George Payton came in as the GM, that stopped. When John Elway was the GM, we were hearing about who the Broncos were interested in, and there was a lot of validity to it because John Elway had great connections with Woody Page, with Mike Kliss, who's obviously a good friend of ours. But George Payton doesn't operate that way, and I like that because you have all these people coming out here creating these speculative reports. And these days on Twitter, for example, you don't know what is real, what's reputable, what's not. But I can tell you this, if there's anything out there that says the Broncos and Sean Payton like this guy, there's nothing behind it that really comes from substance, right? As you mentioned, I think you make a great point. Denver could be enamored with J.J. McCarthy. They could be enamored with Bo Nix, with Michael Penix Jr., Jaden Daniels, Caleb Williams, Drake May. They could be enamored with any of these guys here, but they're not going to let anybody know that, because you know what that does? That impacts strategy. And look, I think Sean Payton, He does have a reputation around the league. There might be some people out there who are like, hey, if Sean likes this guy, and we know he does, we're going to do whatever we can to make sure he doesn't get that out of spite, right? And so you have to be very mindful of how this is. There could be some conversations that happen, at the combine, on a cocktail napkin, so to speak, like George Payton did with John Schneider several years ago. But nothing about what Denver's going to do is coming out. So if you see any reports out there that say, hey, the Broncos are interested in this guy, they may have interest in him, but whether or not it's valid or not, or that it's actually publicly documented, that's never going to come out. And I think we really, really have to, Sayre, as we get into free agency coming up, we get into this time right now, the build up to the draft. You're going to see so many different posts. You're going to see so many different things out there, and it misleads the fan base, which is, I think, the number one thing we have to kind of put a stop to is the fan base can't be picking up all these breadcrumbs and have this hope. And then it's not that, because you know what that does? It fuels disappointment, and then it leads to toxic discourse, and it makes it unenjoyable for everybody.
You mean the toxic discourse, like me getting an email, Cody, saying that I should probably try my hand at flipping burgers because I made a mock draft that upset somebody. I guess, yeah, I did go buy just a 6-pack of burgers. So, I mean, we'll see what happens. I like grilling outside, but look, there's a couple of things to remember about this whole situation. Number one, the Broncos did have formal interviews, which they're only allowed 45 total. They did have formal interviews with all of Caleb Williams, Drake May, Jaden Daniels, Bo Nix, Michael Penix Jr., Spencer Rattler, as well as one other guy, Cody.
Pratt.
I know they had 7. Pratt, exactly. So they had at least 7 interviews with quarterbacks at this year's NFL draft combine. And what does that mean? That means that they're trying to get as much information on every single one of these guys as is possible. You had like Spencer Rattler, who went out and said, man, I felt like the Broncos really liked my tape. Feel like they really liked what they saw. And then Michael Penix Jr. comes out and says they were grilling me on my worst plays. So there's differences in how they approach each of these players, but also in terms of leaking interest, you can't even leak it to these players. You can't let these players know, hey, like, we want to come for you, because you know what they're going to do? They got to tell their agent, and their agent is going to shop that around to other teams. Hey, you want my guy? You better get ahead of the Broncos because they really like him. There's so much that you have to do to make sure that you don't give away what you want to do at this time of year. And some stuff does get leaked from other teams. We do see that happen very, very frequently, especially as closer to that we get to the NFL draft. But for the Denver Broncos and the quarterback situation, it has to be under lock and key, to say the very least.
Well, and this is one of those things. It's like the secret ingredient, right? You cannot give it away to the Krabby Patty. And the Broncos, Sean Payton, they're not going to do that. It is locked, safe, and secure. And we're going to find out when Denver's on the clock, or if they make a move to move up, whatever it may be. We're going to find out here in just about a month and a half. And I am so stoked for the ride here with you, Sayre, and with everybody in Broncos country here in the Locked On Broncos podcast, to really kind of set the table for all of that, though. There have to be a certain amount of things that go on before the Broncos make their pick. And that leads to Denver making some potential roster moves beginning this week, possibly here on Monday. We'll dive deep into maybe some roster restructures that they can do with some of the contracts on today's brand new episode, Locked On Broncos. Today's Locked On Broncos podcast is brought to you by our friends over there at FanDuel Sportsbook, America's #1 sportsbook. Get buckets today with FanDuel, and you can get in on all the action. And with new customers right now, if you sign up today as a brand new customer, you can get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. So if you sign up, let's say you go into an NBA game this week and you place a $5 bet, let's say on the money line for the Denver Nuggets as they take on some of the other teams that they got going on a tough schedule this week. If the Denver Nuggets win that game and you place that $5 bet there on the money line, you're going to get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed. You can bet on all of your favorite NBA players and teams, especially as the postseason push begins, as teams try to figure out and finalize their seeding between the 1st seed, the 8th seed. You're going to have the play-in games going on. There's a whole bunch of action that you can get involved with FanDuel Sportsbook today, including live bets, quick bets, live same-game parlays, exclusive props, and more. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and shoot your shot. Once again, that's FanDuel.com/lockedon. FanDuel is the official sportsbook partner of the NBA.
before the Denver Broncos attack free agency in 2024, they got to do a little bit of spring cleaning, just like the rest of us. And that means that there could be some big names doing some contract restructures to help this Broncos team do a little something in free agency. We're going to break it down on today's episode, Locked On Broncos, and want to say thank you. Give a shout out to every single one of you that makes Locked On Broncos your first listen of the day, every single day, free and available everywhere that you listen to podcasts, as well as on YouTube, where you can watch Cody and I and engage with other members of Broncos Country. And the Broncos are, Cody, getting ready to do some spring cleaning here at the beginning of March. It's early spring cleaning, but look, you got to be ready. Free agency starts effectively on March 11th, right? I mean, officially it starts March 13th, but the legal negotiating period, the legal tampering period begins on Monday, March 11. That's when players can start to agree to deals. And I think we need to set something straight here really quick before we talk about these players getting restructured. The Broncos could be in on day one of free agency. Just because they may not be involved in tier one doesn't mean they won't be involved in day one. So you should expect activity, I would say, from the Broncos. Just may not be on those big name guys that are getting signed. With that being said, there's players that need to restructure their deals in order for the Broncos to start making moves in free agency as early as possible. Let's break it down with some of these big names, some starters on either side of the ball. Let's start with Courtland Sutton. He could help the team out with a restructure. Sounds like he's going to be back. What could he do to help this team get some cap space, much needed cap space?
Yeah, I think, a restructuring of his deal, converting something into a signing bonus. Now, for me, I want to be very clear here. I utilize SpotTrack's roster management tool, which if you want to put on your GM hat, you want to go have fun and try to build the roster a little bit. They give you options on a release post June 1st designation. You can even take a look at, restructuring. So that's what I did, right? So the salary conversions to a bonus are based on based minimum contracts here. So looking at Courtland Sutton specifically, set to make $17.3 million in 2024. A restructure there in terms of overall cap hit would save the Broncos around $6.4 million. Now, I've seen different numbers floated out there, and I think it's important to know that Mike Kliss, our good friend over at 9 News, on Friday did report that the house cleaning, the spring cleaning stuff is going to come up here. He mentioned in there specifically restructures, and he mentioned cuts. He didn't mention anything about extensions, but we'll dive into the possibility of extension later here in the show. So me using SpotTrack's tool, looking at where just converting it to a base minimum, it would save the Broncos $6.4 million to restructure Courtland Sutton, which doesn't take them out of being over the cap right now, but it certainly does help. He's one of those options there. My question is, okay, I think some people confuse restructure with taking a pay cut, right? A restructure just means basically you're converting a portion of your salary into a signing bonus. You're getting that money regardless here. And you also free up some cap space to help the team. Tim Patrick did that for the last 2 seasons for Denver in the offseason. Courtland coming off of a big year, though, 10 touchdown catches. I mean, do the Broncos have room to ask him to restructure here?
I think they do, Cody, and I think it's a great reason for him to come to the table and say, hey, we'll give you some guaranteed cash right now up front. Nothing else is really going to change, but it's just some extra guaranteed money. These are typically very player-friendly deals. Like you mentioned, it's not asking him to come in and say, hey, we're going to slash your salary by $6 million. It's saying, no, we want to give you this bonus right now so that we can be flexible on the cap. It also serves as maybe a little bit of a future guarantee, right? Because anytime you restructure a deal, you're kicking the proverbial can down the road, and you're really loading up the back half of that contract, and it makes it tougher to get rid of that guy. So if the Broncos have decided we're not trading Courtland Sutton, he's going to be on this team for 2 years, then it makes all the sense in the world to restructure, which is a similar situation with somebody like Mike McGlinchey, who signed a 5-year deal in the 2023 offseason. He's got obviously big numbers all throughout that 5-year deal. But look, if he restructures, which he should absolutely restructure, Cody, Broncos could save $10.4 million using that particular tool on SpotTrack that you're talking about, not just kicking the can down the road, but converting some money into bonuses, however they want to do that. Mike McGlinchey can help the team out, and I think that that's something they probably wrote into that deal when they first agreed to it.
Well, and on top of that, I think you and I were talking on a previous episode after he had signed, when the contract details got leaked about McGlinchey. saying that, okay, wasn't after like 3 years, it's easy for Denver to get out of that deal essentially for them without big financial repercussions. I think that a restructure from McGlinchey, look, he's a team guy. Look, he won the Darren Williams Good Guy of the Year award. Obviously, you're someone who always met with us in the media, whether it was good times, whether it was bad times, he was always front and center. And look, he has even acknowledged that his play wasn't where it needed to be, especially after signing the contract that he signed. But I think for him, he's the ultimate team guy. Anything he can do to help the team get better, he's going to find a way to do that. And he's not losing money by doing this request if the Broncos approach him. So I do expect that to happen here. I want to bring up Zach Allen. Obviously, he's another guy that the Broncos signed in free agency to replace Draymond Jones, working on the tool there on Spot Track. You know, it says $19 million in 2024. A restructure saves Denver around $7 million in cap space, which they're going to need all the help that they can get because there's some other moves that are coming up here. You look at him and then even look at another guy they extended last year, and Alex Singleton, a restructuring of his contract could save them $2.6 million. Now, that's not necessarily a lot, but when we're talking about when you're trying to get cap compliant, that could be a difference between being, you know, over or under the cap when you try to make some other moves here happen.
Yeah, and 2.6 million could be a I don't know, low end starter. It could be a key rotational player when you're talking about cap hits, because when teams structure these deals, typically you're going to see the year one cap hit be really low compared to the next, you know, couple of years or whatever it may be. So you expect to be able to get a pretty good player for, you know, somewhere between the 4 to 6 million cap hit range in year one of the deal. At 2.6 million, that's no small amount of change there for the Broncos to be able to work with on the cap. And the reason why they can do all these things, Cody, is because they have obviously very cash rich ownership. The ownership in Denver, having those deep pockets, allows you the flexibility to be able to do this year in and year out. We don't want the Broncos to be in salary cap trouble every year by any means, but even if they're in good standing, or even if they're kind of close to the cap, they have the ability to say, hey, let's convert some of this money to a bonus. Let's get some cap space. We can add more players. You see a lot of the best teams around the league do these types of things all the time. And the Broncos just have not really had much of a need to do it because, like we've mentioned before, they're typically in better standing against the salary cap because they've not had, you know, this Russell Wilson deal is really the first massive quarterback deal that they've had on the books in a while. So I think, Cody, that really plays into the whole big picture here. You have deep pockets at the ownership spot. Therefore, you can go and make these kinds of moves to get yourself some cap space.
And we have seen that the Walton Penner family ownership group, they care about the on-field product. They care about how the fans feel. And if they have to do something on the financial aspect, they are going to do it. And that's what really this meeting that they're going to have this week. I believe Sean Payton said it's Wednesday or Thursday that he and George Payton, they're meeting with ownership and they're discussing the offseason plan. They're discussing free agency, what they need to have happen, the requesting maybe support in certain areas that they may need it. And they're going to go out and they're going to do that. And I'm very, very curious to see what the outcome is here, because as you mentioned, like this is just a brand new spot. Like it's not something that I think is as backbreaking as people make it seem. I've seen so many comments saying, oh, Denver can't do anything because of their salary cap and where they're at. I'm like, this isn't an impossible situation. Like it's very manageable. So I think that we'll find a little bit of reprieve on this narrative a little bit later on this week, and as the buildup for free agency does begin here. But with that said, too, we talked about maybe contract restructures. There are some potential roster cuts that are expected to take place this week. We take a look, including maybe at left tackle with Garett Bolles. What would that look like for the Broncos, and could there be an extension in place? We'll break all that stuff down here on today's brand new episode of the show. This show is sponsored by BetterHelp, and a lot of us spend our lives wishing that we had more time to do the things that we're passionate about, whether that's spending time with our family, going on adventures, experiencing life, or just trying to find balance in our day-to-day. The question is, time for what? If time was unlimited, how would you use it? The best way to squeeze that special thing into your schedule is to know what's important to you and to make it a priority. We don't always have the answers on how to do that, but BetterHelp can connect us with the resources and the tools to make that possible. Therapy can help you find what matters to you so you can do more of it. I've utilized BetterHelp therapy in the past. And look, I deal with stress. I deal with anxiety quite a bit in my day to day. I do a really good job of getting on camera here and putting on this energetic mask. There are some days I turn the camera off, I'm exhausted, right? And so therapy is something that I take advantage of because it helps me figure out where I'm at. It's always good to recheck in with myself and to maybe sharpen some of the tools that I've already built using therapy. BetterHelp has been very useful for me in my experience, and it could be for you. I've had listeners to Locked On Broncos tell me that they've enjoyed their experience and that they've gotten a lot out of using BetterHelp. And the thing about it that I love about BetterHelp, if you're thinking of starting therapy, I encourage you to give BetterHelp a try because you can create a therapy schedule based on your time. It's flexible based on if you want to do it from home, you can. Like, it's convenient. You can do it sitting in your bed. You can do it sitting at your desk here, enjoying a cup of coffee while you go through a therapy session. That's what I like about BetterHelp. All you do is you just fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist, and then you can switch therapists at any time at no additional cost if you and your therapist don't vibe well. Therapy can be super important, so make sure you have the right therapist for you. BetterHelp will help you connect to that person. Learn to make time for what makes you happy with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/lockedon today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedon. This will be a big week here for the Denver Broncos as they could make several roster cuts to free up salary cap space to become cap compliant by the time that the new league year rolls around. Some fan favorites could be on their way out, or some players could be extended. We'll break it down here on today's episode of Locked On Broncos. Real quick, want to say thank you so much once again to everybody in Broncos Country. Thanks for making us your first listen of the day every single day. You can get this podcast for free on YouTube or wherever you get your podcast. So subscribe or follow if you have not done so already. If you're a Broncos fan and you know some other Broncos fans out there that don't know about the show, share the show with them. Help expand it to members of Broncos Country, where you get in-depth, objective coverage of everything going on with your favorite team. Sayre, big week here ahead. And I think this is the week we all anticipate some big decisions coming down here for the Broncos, including the Russell Wilson release. I think the expectation is that is going to happen here this week. We know that George and Sean are going to meet with ownership on Wednesday or Thursday. I expect something probably no later than Friday or Saturday in terms of clarity on Russ's decision. It could even be sooner rather than later. It could be sooner than that. So a lot riding on this week here.
Yeah, well, Cody, you brought it full circle there. A lot riding on it. I mean, that's the last ride. I mean, for Russell, that's sad, guys. Come on, we got to, as much as polarizing as this whole last 2 years has been. Man, we held out so much hope for this, and obviously to see this era come to an end, we wish Russell Wilson the best, whatever the case may be going forward. If it's Denver, if it's elsewhere. But look, by Friday, I think we all expect the writing's kind of on the wall. What's going to happen with Russell Wilson? The question at this point really comes down to, are the Broncos going to eat all the dead money in 2024? Are they going to split it up between 2 years? How are they going to split it up between 2 years? Is somebody going to throw a draft pick at them and trade for Russ? And would he even approve a trade? Because he has a no trade clause in his contract, so he doesn't have to help the Broncos out in that way if he doesn't want to. And then how quickly does he sign if and when this move goes down? Because the Broncos would be effectively releasing him before free agency begins. So he'd be able to go out there and get ahead of all that at least a little bit, which is why I kind of feel, Cody, like it could happen early this week here. So we'll see what happens, but the whole Russell Wilson situation looms large over everything else that the Broncos do, because they're going to have to explain that to prospective free agents. They're going to have to explain that to guys they're going to asking about restructures. They're going to have to explain this to guys they're asking to take, maybe just cut overall, as far as like, hey, we're going to slash your pay, or guys they're getting rid of. So there's a lot riding on this, like you said, Russell Wilson situation that I think impacts the rest of the offseason. But there are players who could be cap casualties. Russ isn't really a cap casualty. You're not saving any money by letting go of Russell Wilson. You save cash in 2025, but no cap space. There's guys who could save the team cap space by getting cut. Let's talk about somebody, Garett Bolles, right here. He $20 million on this year's salary cap overall number, $16 million base salary, no guaranteed money left. What does that all mean? It means that the Broncos cut or trade Garett Bolles, they save $16 million. What do you view as the most likely path this team takes with him?
This is a great question because then you don't want to create a need, right? If Denver's going all in on quarterback in this year's NFL draft, you are not going to go into the season. No offense to Demontre Jacobs or Alex Paucheski or anything like that, but those are undrafted guys. Those guys are relatively unproven. So you're going to put a rookie quarterback under center on the left side. You know what that would scream to me? Every team that Denver plays this year, if that were the reality, they'd put the best pass rusher, whether it's Max Crosby, whoever else is lined up there to that player's side all game long. And there's not much you can do to help a player like that. Like that, in my opinion, that's handcuffing yourself. So does that make logical sense? Financially, moving on from Garett Bolles may make sense for the Broncos, but from a roster standpoint, in my opinion, it makes more sense to extend him on a 1 or 2 year deal, right? That's going to be the one way you can create the most space. Now, obviously, when you look at his overall cap hit this year, $20 million, that's quite a bit. I don't think Denver wants to pay that. You know, they want to keep Garett, but they don't want to pay that type of price. Same thing with Tim Patrick. Like Tim is going to have to, find a way to take a pay cut in this sense because of back-to-back season-ending injuries in training camp. Tim doesn't necessarily have leverage on the business side. Even though he's an impact player, you can definitely tell on the film in the last 2 seasons, he has been missed on the field for the Broncos offense, right? But that argument itself is not going to keep things the way that they are. So in my opinion, Tim is probably going to have to take a pay cut here. Garett, in my opinion, is probably a prime candidate to be extended, and I feel like that's something the Broncos will probably do.
That would be huge news, obviously, because it, like you said, you're either creating a need at this position or you're eliminating a need, or you're taking way too big of a cap hit for 1 more year of a guy, depending on what happens. So I could absolutely see any scenario with Bolles. I'm kind of on the page of like, I don't know what's going to happen there. It doesn't seem like, from what he's told folks like James Palmer of NFL Network, sounds like maybe there's been rumors or rumblings that Garett doesn't know how the Broncos are going to keep everybody. I'm fascinated to see what happens with that whole situation. Tim Patrick, he's, like you mentioned, he's kind of helped the team out contractually over the last couple of years. The Broncos could save $9.5 million by cutting him straight up. I think, Cody, as opposed to taking a $6 million dead cap hit, I could see the Broncos trying to go to Tim and say, let's rip up the final year of this deal and let's redo it. Let's completely redo it. Let's do a 2-year deal worth $8 million or $10 million or something like that. It will get you on a cap hit this year of like $2.5 million. Hey, the $2.6 million savings that we talked about from Alex Singleton. You could find ways to do that. You find creative ways to kind of replace all these numbers and make it work to keep guys around, as well as saving a bunch on the salary cap. So that would be something that I could see happening, because you could save more cap space by just ripping up the final year of that deal for Tim Patrick and agreeing to a completely different contract. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens with him. But look, I think Justin Simmons is another name, Cody, that there's trade winds blowing. Obviously, Vic Fangio, Christian Parker, and 100 other former Broncos are out there in Philadelphia now. There's, they just traded or released Kevin Byard out there in Philadelphia. So you kind of see there's breadcrumbs leading to a trade in Philadelphia. But at the same time, Justin Simmons, he's like a Bronco for life at this point. You don't want to see the team turn this around without him. What do you think happens with Jay Sims in the next couple of weeks?
I think that there's a possibility of extension. I think that's probably the best course of action, right? 2 to 3 year extension there. I mean, obviously his impact has not dropped off for the Broncos. I mean, heck, he missed, 5 games in 2022 and still had the league lead in interceptions, but also had the league lead there in overall takeaways accounted for. I believe it was 10. I think the next guy there was 9. So like, he was an impact player. Obviously had an impact last season for the Broncos, despite dealing with an early season groin injury that he sustained in training camp, playing through that and then taking some time off. And you can tell when he was not on the field, Denver was not very good defensively in terms of their communication. He's a difference maker for them. The Broncos love him. I know the ownership group loves him. Sean Payton loves him. And the question is like, are they going to do whatever they can? Like, Sayre, I look at it from this standpoint. I don't see a possibility of Justin Simmons not being on the roster in 2024. You want to know why? Because safety is a huge question mark opposite of him and the other safety spot. Why are you going to create 2 voids now? Arguably one of the more important positions to have in the NFL. If you have one really good player, you can supplement by filling in a guy who can be a robber, can be a guy that rotates down in the box. But Justin Simmons is one of the best middle of the field post safeties in the National Football League. And I just don't see a situation where he's not on the roster. So to me, extension is probably on the table for him. I think that is something that they'll work on. But, Justin also wants to win too. So This is one of those situations I don't know, but I would be earth-shatteringly shocked if Justin was not a member of the team next season. I think they find a way to make it happen.
I think a lot of fans would be devastated if he's not on the team, right? I mean, it's obviously the Broncos have lost so much. It's like there's a cynical mindset that's like nobody's off limits. I don't care who you put on this team, just start finding a way to win. But then there's a mindset of like, man, we see the team improve by 3 wins last year, and you want a guy like Justin Simmons who joined the year after Super Bowl 50. You want to see him get a shot to see this whole process that's played out since 2016. I mean, when he got to the team, that he could be part of something special in Denver, not just that he would get to go like Von Miller with the Rams and, go win a Super Bowl somewhere. And we could all be kind of happy for him, but also kind of jealous and like, just remember the good old times. Even though with Justin, it's like, we want to see him get to win some big games in Denver. So I agree with you. I hope it's an extension for him as opposed to a trade, unless some team comes offering something ridiculous, which, as you know, that's the one way to get tempted into something like this. So we'll see what happens, Broncos country. But all these big names, man, I think we're shaping up to see some really intriguing stuff this week as the Broncos get ready for free agency.
What is your level of excitement, Broncos country, on a scale of 1 to 10 as free agency comes up with all these decisions that we have talked about here on the show? Where are you at on a scale of 1 to 10? Let us know here on the Locked On Broncos podcast. But with that said, Broncos country, we'll have you covered every step of the way. If there's breaking news, if there is a big roster move that happens, tune in to Locked On Broncos every single day throughout this entire week for all your latest up-to-date information surrounding your favorite team. We'll break it down from every side of the coin from an objective standpoint. We'll look at the critical standpoint of it as well. You can get that here, Locked On Broncos. We'll see you then.